Perfect. So let's kick things off here. So as I mentioned, we're going to be focused today on cloud security monitoring and analytics using the Sumo Logic solution. My name is Jason Dunne. I'm a product marketing manager here at Sumo. So just a quick overview of kind of our overarching security intelligence portfolio. Here you can see on the left, audit compliance is really going to allow you to accelerate through audit season, primarily focused on HIPAA compliance, PCI, various other types of compliance, and really finding ways in which you can, kind of work really closely with the team that is performing your audits and making sure they have the data that they need in order to actually execute against their various goals. The second column is the cloud security monitoring and analytics solution, which we'll focus on for today. Really, we'll look at how to monitor, detect, search, and investigate security incidents before they occur. And also we'll get a little bit into kind of the threat benchmarking piece of thinking about how do you level up against similar companies in the space that may be looking at having similar solutions as well, and what does that process actually look like. In tomorrow's session with Dana Torgerson, the Cloud SIEM piece of the puzzle will be addressed, and that's really thinking about how to automatically triage alerts, detect threats, perform threat hunting, investigation, etc. And then last but not least would be Cloud Source. So O, of course, being orchestration, A being automation, and that's what really allows you to accelerate your various types of response to security incidents as they occur. A quick overview for folks. I think some on the call are probably very familiar with Sumo Logic and the offering that we include as a part of our set of solutions. But just for folks that are not as aware, we have over 2,100 customers today that are utilizing the platform. Over 27 exabytes of data being scanned monthly. And I'll touch on kind of the other pieces throughout today's presentation, but I also want to just call out here the flexible credits pricing model, which allows you to use all four of these solutions and just kind of tune the credits accordingly in line with what your goals are as a team. So Larry Wong had a question, which is, are all of these separate products? So the long and the short of it is, for sure, this is all one platform that can be utilized for and paid for, right, by way of the flexible credits model. So you can decide which of these aspects of the product is most relevant to your solution. But the reality is that the two on the left kind of exist within the continuous intelligence solution. So cloud security monitoring, audit compliance, both utilize the solution, which I'll be demoing for sort of the back half of today's presentation. Cloud SIEM, it does pop you over, and I can show you what that UX looks like. It does pop you over into a separate user experience. So you would basically hit the bottom left. There's a button that will take you into Cloud SIEM. And similarly for Cloud Source as well. So it is sort of a different user experience, but just think of it all kind of under one umbrella of the larger solution set. So hopefully that answers your question, Larry, and good question. Thanks for asking that. Good to clarify that right out the gates here. So yeah, we'll focus on the second column for today, and we'll kind of dig in here. I'll actually kind of let's think about what some of the common solutions or challenges and associated solutions are within the Sumo Logic cloud security monitoring solution. So very commonly we hear from customers that sort of the focus on cloud native capabilities and the ability to bring in firewall, database, identity access, CDN data, list goes on. And the demo will kind of show what that looks like as far as what the actual even ingest process looks like. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of our customers find that to be a big challenge, that they're not able to bring in all of the best possible data sources for their particular use case. So that kind of flexibility, I think, is very a big aspect of what our customers find to be really helpful. And then, in line with that, with being able to bring those many different types of data sources in, what that also brings with it is really the visibility into all of those data sources and the ability to monitor and analyze. And I'll actually show in this next diagram in a moment what that looks like in a concrete sense. how that actually translates to insights that can be readily used by a security engineering team to get to kind of the root cause of a particular incident. We also hear very commonly from customers that, because of this focus on really detecting, investigating, responding to active security incidents, in a lot of cases, the fact that many platforms just have sort of a more vanilla approach of saying, just here, take this open source, open source GitHub repo and just kind of take it and run with it. The reality is that doesn't really take as much of a security focused approach. So Sumo Logic very much has had a security focus from the start, in addition to having a DevOps focus. So with that set of capabilities, you're able to do a lot more just out of the box without having to really customize quite as much. So here, as I mentioned, we can look at kind of what the data sources are, how those actually funnel in to the core continuous intelligence platform, and then what kind of the levels of granularity are. So when we talk about data sources, we're really talking here about apps that are being built by you for your customers. So external products could be, for example, a SaaS product that's being made available to your customers. So all of those sort of syslogs that would trail out of your own applications can then be fed into our platform. And then the SaaS IT piece would be here referring like to a Zoom or a Palo Alto Networks, and actually I can show Palo Alto Networks later during the demo. But being able to actually ingest all that data is a really valuable source of data that's very relevant to the monitoring and analytics use cases that become available if you're using the continuous intelligence platform for those various capabilities. And then multi-cloud, right? So we actually just got back from AWS reInvent, and we did hear from customers for sure that they oftentimes were all in on AWS, but there might also be other situations where they're utilizing Azure or GCP additionally. And then last but not least, we definitely still have many customers that are managing their own on-premise data that they want to actually be able to bring into the platform. So that kind of ingestion into the security monitoring platform is what's going to allow them to really surface those critical security issues and have those really use case specific queries for analyzing those broad data types. We'll kind of get into the specifics of how monitoring versus analytics kind of compare based on what the use case is, and I'll show you what that looks like within the platform. But when you're actually in the level of really getting down to the query level and tuning a specific custom query for your particular use case, you can actually pivot that out at the device level, IP level, network level, database level, depending on what the particular use case is. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead. Here we're looking at detection of the threats and how you would actually generate actionable insights based on those types of data sources you're bringing in. This is an example of a AWS focused dashboard that would allow you to very quickly detect. And then once you do that, you can actually pivot out at the query level. I'll show you this in a more live way within the demo itself. And you can actually have more of a, although we're talking about kind of response within the right column here in particular, as well as Cloud SIEM, you do have the option of having investigation response as a capability within the continuous intelligence platform as well. So you can really improve your security posture. And by way of a Slack webhook or Microsoft Teams webhook, you could actually click straight out into this response dashboard and get a better sense of what's going on within your system. So this is just a sampling of a couple of security monitoring dashboards. Primarily, I'm going to be touching today on Linux and Palo Alto dashboards, but this kind of dovetails in with the Azure and Okta example best of really going specific with that particular data source. Before I do that, I'm actually going to pop some of these resources into the chat so that if you want to basically just click in and get a better sense of what's going on in terms of like the supporting assets for each of these, then you definitely have that option as well. So at this point, I'm going to actually go into kind of switch into demo mode here. So here you can see the continuous intelligence platform. Within the app catalog, you see that we have the option of over 170 different apps that are available to you based on what your particular use cases are that you're focused on. And within each of those, you have either a security monitoring or security analytics dashboard that can be utilized in order to kind of pivot out and better understand what's happening with your data. You can also make adjustments to the data that you're collecting or go into either like the logs or metrics use case, depending on your use case. So in each of these cases, you really have the option to kind of dig in a lot deeper and better understand, or even look at the particular alerts that you've set up for each of them. But yeah, let's start with Linux security monitoring. So this is a very, very simple dashboard, just these very straightforward spark lines that are indicating to me what the amount of successful logins versus failed logins are within the OS. I can actually go out and look in the particular search that supports this, and this is the query that underpins it. You can see that we're calling Linux as the source category that's most relevant, and we're particularly looking at sudo, sshd, etc. And we're looking at what are the accepted, accepted logins for each of these, and then kind of parsing out the associated fields that are most relevant. We can actually look more granularly at the actual message level and the extracted fields for each of them. So you can see then how you can imagine bringing in this out of the box dashboard, then going more specific with a custom build, depending on what your kind of various requirements are within each. And then if we go down into sort of this, what we'd refer to as the security analytics level, where we're getting more granular, you may actually already know what particular users you want to focus on, in which case you can determine here that you want to actually dig into that one specific destination user. Actually, in this case, it would be, so vbox add is an example of that particular user. And we can actually pivot out and better understand what that particular user's activities are. And we can see the active services over time are showing up as primarily SSHD as the primary service that's showing up. Then just below that would be SmartD, then Shadow, Network Manager. If that aligns with our expected behavior, then we're all good. We're off to the races, nothing out of the ordinary. But the case may be the other way around, which is that you're seeing either like a spike or an anomaly, unexpected behavior. You could set up an alert on that to indicate every time you see that unexpected behavior, then kind of indicate to me which user I need to be digging into. But if we go back to kind of the wildcard with the asterisks, then we can better understand what the overarching kind of user behavior is, and see what the services and system monitoring is that's associated with that. We can also see the stop services and the system time change attempt over time. In this case, we don't see any data display indicating no services are being stopped in that time period, which is kind of a little bit different visualization, a little different approach to how we can actually dig in and get a better sense of what's going on within your system. And then in this case, actually, we'll stay on the Linux example of the data sources that are coming in. But I also want to show you an example of how an outlier can actually indicate to you what the most relevant data is that needs to be acted on. In this case, this is probably a little too sensitive of a threshold for what we're looking to achieve, because the pink triangles are actually indicating to us when we're falling outside of the expected threshold or range. So in this case, typically it's not going to be as relevant to see the low point. So we could actually adjust the query to remove the low point of the threshold and only look at the high points. And we could even increase the threshold to say, right now, maybe it's set to 1.5, outside of 1.5x out of the typical range, but we could go to 3.5 or something much higher, to where, in the last 7 days, we may only expect to see 1 or 2 spikes or anomalies outside of that range. That can just be a really helpful way to set up an alert to actually indicate to us that there's an anomaly that sort of requires action on your part. And you can actually just set you have the ability to actually just quarantine the host straight from there based on that behavior. So let's jump ahead. Let's move away from Linux, and we'll use Palo Alto Networks as an example. So here we're looking at Palo Alto Networks security monitoring. Particularly, we're looking at threat log broken down by severity level. So we're seeing the geolocation of events. This honeycomb visualization is actually showing us what kind of the hotspots are. So this darker color is indicating more occurrences, lighter color is less. We're seeing more events by destination IP. So this 132.237 example, we're seeing that the rule name kata inbound is being triggered 47 times just in the last hour, which is kind of a higher number than we might expect. And we're seeing that we're also primarily a lot of the activity is occurring. Looks like Texas is the primary area of activity. So this might align with the fact maybe you have a data center or a cloud resource that you would expect to occur close to the Austin, Texas area. But if it's outside of the expected range or not something you're anticipating, that might be an area of focus to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. Based on the Spark line, we're seeing in the last 60 minutes, 348 events of critical severity level. We're seeing a little bit of a drop off in the last 5 minutes, but that's honestly just expected because we're still seeing the data kind of roll in. So you may actually just want to lop off kind of the last 60 minutes and kind of ignore that particular piece. Or you can even see that it'll likely even out if we look at sort of a longer time period. As we go down the list, we see high severity, medium severity. You can see the honeycomb, there are more occurrences there, and 2,000 events versus 77,000 events. So informational is sort of the lowest severity level. So we expect to see a much higher number of events over the last hour. But yeah, here we can see that there's an evening out. We don't actually see the lopping off that's required anymore, because if we're looking at 7 days of critical severity events, we see generally some level of consistency, it's sort of staying within a given range. But again, you could set up an outlier alert based around that particular requirement as well. So again, this is really more security monitoring. So we're looking at more of kind of the overarching view of what's going on within the system. If we look at security analytics for Palo Alto Networks data, and actually I should even pivot out really quickly and show you what this query looks like. So this should look familiar from when we looked at the Linux query. We're actually setting an asterisk on all Palo Alto Networks data. So this entire account could have any number of Palo Alto Networks data sources that we're referencing. And we're actually extracting, in this case, from CSV. And we're getting all of the fields that are required. So action source, action flags, etc. Everything that's most relevant. And then we're deciding, we want to actually look at both the private source IP and the public destination IP, and only returning top 20 because it can get a little bit noisy if we're looking at all results. And that's where honeycomb comes in, where the darker color again is indicating to us a higher indication. So a couple interesting things here. SMTP, MySQL, SSL, etc. These are kind of the top outbound traffic, and this is pretty expected. I mean, web browsing should always be in sort of your top 3. If we're talking about network data in particular, it's just going to be that much more relevant. And then we're seeing day over day outbound DNS activity, and we're seeing a little bit of spike and kind of a little bit of a gradual roll up, although it's kind of inconsistent from a 10-minute, 5-minute interval over time. We're seeing these various increments that change quickly. So nothing that's completely out of the ordinary here, but you can see that there are situations where maybe this much darker color, we're actually seeing 2.3 million events for that host. That would be a pretty good indicator that we'd want to actually dig in. Then I can click into that and we can see a little bit of a summary if it's the all logs or error signatures. What's really nice is if I actually look at the signatures, it's telling me, in this case, we don't see any results because there are no differentiated signatures. And the nice thing about the signature feature, though, is that it can actually tell me a sort of a summarized set of particular types of logs, or like a categorization of those logs that can be really relevant, really helpful for that particular situation. And then if we look at, if we just pivot out quickly on, again, we can look at each of these individual queries and get to know kind of what's going on. So here we're broken out by where type equals traffic. We're actually getting pretty granular with the time slice being down to the 1 minute. But in this case, we're actually doing top 50. So just gives you a little bit of a sense of how you can actually tune each of these queries based on what your requirements are. So with that, I'm just going to do actually a quick time check. So we're bumping up against time here. I'm going to jump back into a slideshow. I've popped these into the chat, which are just the basically the best kind of quick overviews, or if you want to share out to your teammates some of what you've learned today, this gives you a pretty good reference point as far as security analytics overview. Demo video is actually a sort of a condensed version of what you saw today. And then security intelligence is kind of an overview of the whole portfolio. We looked at kind of all four pieces of the puzzle. And as I mentioned, tomorrow we'll be on Cloud SIM, which is the third piece, third column over. Cloud SOAR is also its own demo. Today we're focused on the second column. So if you want kind of that overarching view of the security intelligence portfolio, that's where you would go to do it. If you want to go more specific to cloud security monitoring and analytics, this particular part of the of our kind of set of assets will be the most relevant for that. We also have a Slack channel called Sumo Dojo, which is where our customers actually go to have conversations not only with fellow customers that are also focused on trying to solve interesting problems, but also many times Sumo Logic employees will chime in and give a better sense of kind of how they might tackle that particular challenge or kind of solution you're trying to arrive at. So with that, I'm going to kind of call things here and say thanks so much for joining today's webinar and demo. My name again is Jason Dunne, Product Marketing Manager here at Sumo. My email is jdunne@sumologic.com. So DUNNE is the last name. And feel free to sign up for a free trial if this is kind of piquing your interest and you're just getting your feet wet with Sumo Logic. The URL is sumologic.com/sign-up. I can actually just pop that open and it'll just ask for your email, and then it will also ask for a deployment region, so that we know kind of where to spin up the right cloud resources for that requirement. And then you'll just have to, of course, agree to the agreement and kind of get off to the races that way. So, hopefully this piques your interest from that perspective. I'll actually just add the free trial to the chat so that you have that as a reference point. And yeah, if I'm going to just pop open the Q&A, it looks like we've already answered Larry Wong's question. Feel free to pop any questions you might have in a Q&A or in a chat, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have with this last couple minutes. We do have a few extra minutes, so if you feel free to throw out any sort of wild and crazy questions that you might have had about today's webinar and about the platform itself, and I'm more than happy to answer them. So it looks like we had a question come in. Is everything here available in Gov Cloud? So we actually had that question from a customer of ours very recently. The short answer is a quick note on that. So we do have FedRAMP moderate authorization for the continuous intelligence platform. So everything that was showed today is available FedRAMP moderate, but there is a little bit of a sort of hurdle to cross there with, as I'm sure that you're aware, Tom, Gov Cloud has a little bit different set of requirements beyond sort of just FedRAMP moderate. So within that context, the reality of the situation is what we have seen customers do is basically send Gov Cloud data that they're using with their particular system into an S3 bucket, and then they can bring in S3 data into Sumo because of the FedRAMP moderate authorization that allows them to do what they need to do from that perspective. So there's a little bit of a fancy footwork or a little bit creative workaround that you'd have to do to actually send it to S3 and make sure that you're using the right AWS S3 sort of resources in order to achieve that goal. But there are ways to do it, but we don't have like a direct integration with GovCloud per se. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom. Definitely email me at jdunne@sumologic.com if you have kind of follow-up questions around how you might want to tackle that. But let's get creative and think about how we can kind of tackle that particular use case, since we have heard that a few times from customers as a particular requirement, and we've seen some customers do it successfully, but still kind of a work in progress in some cases as far as like, how do you do that in a more direct way? For some, S3 gets the job done. In some cases, you want to do it in a more kind of native integration. So let's kind of think more about that together. So cool. So I'll go on mute for kind of 60 seconds or so. So that'll be kind of your official timeline to get any final questions in if you have any. If not, thanks so much for joining today's session. Really looking forward to having you in the next kind of upcoming sessions as well.